feel like there's a wonderful omen. If you notice, the front of the bulletin has flowers and butterflies, and one of them jumped off of the bulletin right onto the mic stand. Would you believe that?
Yes.
That can only mean good things, right?
Right.
Well, as your pastor emeritus, I guess I should give you a little report. I haven't been sleeping and carousing since I retired. At the beginning, it was very important to stay away from the church so that your new pastoral leadership could come in free of my influence. And so I got very involved in a Presbyterian church near me, and I'm still very involved there at Maximo Presbyterian Church, which is very near where I live. I've also continued to be very active in the Presbyterian ministry to farm workers at Bethel, where I've served on the board continuously since I retired. When I went on to the board, I was informed that I was replacing the last candidate for representative from this district. What was her name again? Who ran against...
Alex Sink?
Alex Sink, of course. And I said, look, she's a Presbyterian elder, and had served very helpfully on the board at the farm worker ministry. I said, I'm not replacing Alex Sink, please, but I'll do the best I can. Anyway, it's been a delightful experience, and I've continued to be involved in the community. Sadly, I've also been getting an education about my body. And I've collected more doctors and dentists since I retired than I could ever have imagined. If I'd just taken biology in high school, I wouldn't need to get educated this way. But too late for that. You can't go back and undo high school again. I sure wish I could sometimes. Okay. It's a real pleasure to be here this morning. The thrust of my sermon is going to focus on the radical hospitality that Jesus embodied and demonstrated to the world in his own life and ministry. But I first wanted to show something about the context of that hospitality, which of course initiates with God, who has reached out to embrace us and to bring us here this morning. The context is the resurrection connection. Of course, on Easter we celebrate the new life, the rising of Jesus from death to new life, and his presence among his first disciples, as we should. But the resurrection is a lot more than just a bodily rising. It is the connection between the life and ministry of Jesus and the life of the church. The connection, the linking, so that what Jesus exhibited in his life and ministry, the church at its best is called to exhibit in our life and ministry. And that's a lot more than just the raising of the body. It's the continuation of a graceful ministry. Our text this morning exhibit that kind of connection. The first one, of course, which Martha so ably described in her paraphrase this morning, is about the feeding of the 5,000. And you heard the details of that. This wonderful young boy who shared his 2 loaves and his 2 fish and his 5 barley loaves when the crowd was hungry. And by the way, note that Jesus, though he was tired and exhausted and had moved away from the crowd to be alone with his disciples and to kind of replenish his spirit and strength, when the crowd approached, he did not turn them away. He was hospitable to the crowd in spite of his own personal need. So the hospitality shows there. But it goes beyond it when the need of the crowd, the hunger of the crowd, is presented to him. And he responds to that hunger as a good host does. The disciples wondered how in the world he would do it. And of course, Martha explained how when they began to move among that crowd of 5,000, suddenly there was enough bread and apparently fish for all. Now, most people focus on the miracle of feeding. But I want to tell you, when I read this text, I focus on the miracle of sharing. I think as they moved among the crowd, there were people who had stuffed away a little bread for themselves, and they were so moved by the hospitality of Jesus, by his response to their hunger, that they pulled that out and shared it with others. And among the group, that kind of sharing spread like a wildfire. And before it was over, all were fed. And the miracle of hospitality, you see, creates a miracle of sharing. Go now to the Pentecost text that Martha also so ably described. Pentecost is, of course, 50 days after the Passover. It's the festival of weeks, it's called, but it's also the barley harvest feast. The disciples are together, and you know, the experience of the Holy Spirit was challenged by some of the religious leaders who said, "Oh, those folks are just drunk on the new wine." And that's when Peter jumped up and began this long sermon about Jesus, the meaning of his ministry, and how his ministry was the fulfillment of the hope of the Jewish people. Well, after that experience, many people ask, "What shall we do?" And Peter says, "Be baptized and accept Jesus Christ as your Messiah." And so the text says many, apparently 3,000 or more, did respond and were baptized. But after the baptism, that is, after they became a community of faith, they began worshiping regularly together, sharing fellowship together, and this is the interesting part, sharing possessions. we're told that many sold their possessions so that food could be bought for the 3,000. Remember, in Pentecost, people came from far, far away to celebrate this feast in Jerusalem. They came from many countries, speaking many languages, and you can imagine if they stayed and lingered in Jerusalem, as they apparently did, because of this presence, of the power of God's presence in the Spirit, like tongues of flame and like a blowing wind. Well, problems of hunger and sustenance would soon arise. And look, just as the miracle of hospitality, of radical hospitality in the feeding of the 5,000, now the miracle of hospitality in the gift of the Spirit and baptism encourages amazing sharing among those first baptized disciples. And so there was enough for all who lingered there in Jerusalem after the experience of the Pentecost.